The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. Native Americans in Kansas are speaking out in support of the retirement of a controversial mascot. Shawnee Mission North High School in Overland Park announced yesterday that it is now the home of the bison. The name change comes after months of meetings and a vote by the students. The mascot debate generated widespread criticism, and in January, the school board approved a new policy barring mascots deemed derogatory or offensive. Kansas State Representative Christina Haswood, who is a citizen of the Navajo Nation, says she's proud to finally see a new mascot chosen. 3 Shawnee Mission elementary schools with mascots referencing negative imagery have also selected new mascots. The district announced those new mascots last week. And a mascot used by North Central High School in Spokane, Washington, is also being retired. A new state law says schools must get permission from a tribal nation to use imagery associated with Native Americans. After Spokane youth shared their concerns, the tribe chose to not endorse any school's request to keep their mascots. Spokane Tribal Chairwoman Carol Evans says the tribe will give the same answer to any school asking to use Native imagery as a mascot. The school district posted a survey asking for a new mascot and received more than 400 responses in the first 48 hours. The Mashantucket Pequots in southeastern Connecticut are making progress in the fight against type 2 diabetes. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, almost 15% of Native American adults are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That's double the rate of white Americans. The Pequots used a program designed by Virta Health to help tribal citizens manage their diabetes. The results from the first year show patients are seeing drops in their A1C levels, overall weight loss, and in some cases, people were able to stop using insulin. Patients had personalized meal plans made for them, and they were able to have appointments online, and they also used an app to track their health. Leaders from the Ponca tribe in Nebraska will testify against Harvard University in a case to return a tomahawk once owned by one of their ancestors. Chief Standing Bear gave his tomahawk to one of his lawyers after winning a 1879 Nebraska federal court case. This made him one of the first Native Americans granted civil rights under U.S. law. Standing Bear's lawyer gave away the artifact, and now the Ponca tribe of Nebraska wants it back.
When it comes to something like that, and really represents not only our culture and our traditions, but also our present day. We're here as a Ponca tribe because of Standing Bear and those that followed him to come back to Nebraska and risk death doing so. That is why we're here today.
The Ponca chairman will be testifying for the resolution in front of the Nebraska legislature on Tuesday, the 18th at noon. A Phoenix family is growing a garden in their front yard, and now they're harvesting more than they can eat. Indian Country Today correspondent Karina Dominguez shows us how the pandemic galvanized them into action.
Tucked away in this Phoenix neighborhood, Katasha Nakai is getting her family involved with the food security movement. Her daughters have been increasingly concerned about Native communities having access to healthy food. Then the pandemic hit, and their grandparents had difficulties accessing fresh produce in the Four Corners area of the Navajo Nation.
And then I remember my grandma saying she just wants a strawberry and stuff during all that. So it really encouraged us to get started on this.
I'm really happy we decided to start a garden, and we do donate some of it to shelters.
The family is donating the fruits of their labor to this youth shelter operated by Native American Connections. They plan on donating to more Native organizations and hope others will follow suit.
Katasha has spent many hours researching plants like hopi beans, otan beans, and amaranth. Traditional foods have stories, and that's made the family feel even more connected to their roots.
It makes me feel really good just because I do watch it grow and I know exactly where it comes from and no pesticides, just everything's natural.
I've always believed that it's important for parents to be the one that teach their kids the skills they're going to need in life.
Gabriella is starting a seed saving program where she gives produce to Native organizations and she teaches them how to save those seeds to grow their own gardens. In Phoenix, Karina Dominguez, Indian Country Today.
The title of the largest tribe in the United States can now be given to the Navajo Nation, and it's due to the pandemic. People requesting financial assistance during the pandemic had to apply for help, so thousands of documents containing information were sent in. The Navajo Nation Office of Controller said more than 293,000 applications were received, leading to a 30.4% increase in tribal enrollment. The Navajo Nation also has the largest land base of any tribe in the country. To read more about this, go to our website, IndianCountryToday.com, and search for the headline, Cherokee No Longer Largest Tribe. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Coming up next, the University of California, Berkeley has been slow to return human remains to their descendants.
We will ask Assemblyman James Ramos, the only Native American serving in the California legislature, about his legislation to make sure that tribes have the legal authority that's required to return their ancestors home. The process of repatriation, moving ancestors from museums to burial grounds, has gone painstakingly slow. Assemblyman James Ramos has said Indigenous people have had to jump through unnecessary hoops for a burial process that really should not even be an issue. The Assemblyman, who is Serrano and Cahuilla, is the first California Indian to be elected to the California State Legislature. Welcome, Assemblyman Ramos.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You've said that California really can't have any sort of healing until we deal with this issue. What's the status now?
So the status now is that we continue to advocate for the repatriation of ancestors of California Indian people in the state of California. My bill, AB 275, started to pave that way, working with the Native American Heritage Commission, which we chaired a long time, since 2007 to 2018. I sat on that board as chairman of it. And we see many times that UC systems and museums would come forward with remains, right? Remains of ancestors of the people of the state of California, the first people. And when the tribes, elders, and those museum directors disagreed on what should be repatriated back, and in some cases, some tribes wanted all that was associated with it, which is right, it's culture. And the museum directors and UCs disagreed. And when they disagreed, the UCs and the museum directors left with the remains and the tribal elders had nothing. I immediately went to work upon being elected in the state legislature on AB 275 that then paves that way for that repatriation process to happen and gives greater weight to the tribal elders in those discussions. So now the tribal elders will leave with those remains as this process moves forward. But also what has happened in the state of California, we're finding that through an audit that was done through the legislature, a joint audit with the UC system, we found over 500,000 Native American remains still in the archives of the UC system. Many of those California Indian people and other Indian people from the United States. So identifying those areas and knowing that those were out there led us to move forward and advocate and get support of the state legislature on these issues.
You know, the University of California system has such a remarkable reputation. They're really putting this all at risk with this kind of recalcitrant behavior, it seems.
It truly is. And certainly to have remains in your archives on shelves for years, for not just 10 years or 20 years, for over 50 to 60 years of not being able to repatriate those items back is concerning. And then when we hear that other professors that have been in that field have taken remains to their private archives. And now we find that out. That's even more troubling and disturbing.
That's almost criminal.
It truly is. But yet, when we talk about Native American remains here in the state of California, we still are dealing with an educational process with the members of the legislature, the community of the state of California, and those that are in the academia world that see those remains as something more of an educational component versus somebody's ancestors and somebody's loved ones that need to be put back into the ground for a proper reburial.
Assemblyman, your legislation has some sanctions. Maybe tell the viewers about those.
So those sanctions continue to move forward. So we have in there some benchmarks to hold the UC system accountable for putting NAGPRA on the NAGPRA boards. Originally, there were supposed to be Native Americans on that board. We found through the audit that they were far and in between of being appointed. So now we're going to be moving forward to have a hearing to see where they're at and where they're updated at. Those sanctions continue to move forward because now we sit in this seat. And so those that are out there in Indian country thinking about running for a political office, representation truly does matter, because once you're in these seats, we can introduce bills that become law. We can introduce issues that we know are important to our people. You don't have to lobby nobody. It's us that now is making that decision for our people. So those sanctions are something that we're moving forward with. I worked with Attorney General in the state of California, Javier Becerra, on these issues. And I'm working closely with now Attorney General Banta on these issues also to bring forward those prosecutions. Because when professors start to move and they have their own personal archives of remains of Indian people, that is criminal. Anywhere else, you would be held accountable. You're carrying around missing bones of people. That is something that as Indian people, we cannot accept. And we continue to work with the Attorney General here in the state of California to hold those accountable.
You raised the issue of representation. The academy, the university system in general, is less than 0.4% represented by American Indians or Alaska Natives. Is that part of the problem, the lack of representation in the higher academy?
So here in the state legislature, in the assembly, we're the first California Indian elected here in the state of California. Other states have been successful in getting Indian people elected. But here in the state of California, one of the largest economy, right, in the United States, here, for the first time, a California Indian person is elected. Because I'm in this seat, I'm able to educate people on issues of repatriation, issues of education, issues of social problems, issues of suicide prevention, all those issues that have faced our people for so long, way before Indian gaming came forward and became successful. These are the issues that we want to continue to tackle. We will tackle the sovereignty and protect Indian gaming, the right to move forward as a sovereign nation, but we also have to start to address the issues that have plagued our people for years. And bringing that educational process forward is through the representation here in the state legislature. If I wasn't here, we would not be able to talk about these issues, not let alone get granted by the Speaker of the Assembly for the first time in history, a California Native American Legislative Caucus to address these issues and to educate the legislature from within. So representation truly does matter.
What about for the university system? Should there be Native Americans as presidents and provosts and board of regents?
Most definitely, there should be that diversity. When we talk about diversity in the state of California, if not the whole United States, many times the Native American people, the Indian people get left out of those percentages of watching how those different diversity changes happening on campuses, on the UC system, and other places. We're at the point to where we still need to entice educators, teachers from Indian country to get into that field of teaching within the schools here in the state of California. In the state of California, we lack California Indian and Indian teachers in the whole system. And when you lack it there, then you lack it at the professor level. You lack it. There has not been one president of a UC or a CSU system who is California Indian or Native American.
I want to shift gears a bit to another contentious issue. You're working a lot on replacing some statutes that are particularly offensive to California Indigenous people. Maybe tell us about that story.
So AB 338 deals with the Juan Pero Serra statue that's here on the Capitol grounds. During the 2020, there was protests that took place and the statue came down. And for years, we know that here in the state of California, the frustration has been built up here in Indian country in California over the Spanish missionaries, as far as projects having to be done, as far as building missions, and not giving the true story and history of what truly has happened to the California people during that time of atrocities and genocide, slavery that took place. All those things has never moved forward. So when that statue came down, I asked before it came back up to have meaningful dialogue with the Indian people as to understand why that frustration happened. That discussion never happened. So I moved forward, AB 338. 338 would replace the Juan Pero Serra statue here on the Capitol grounds and replace it with the input of the local tribes of this area, the Miwok and Nisenan people, so that they could come forward because their voice was absent during the debates of 1967 when that statue was put up. Now their voice is being heard. And it's interesting that you bring this bill up because in about a half hour, I have to present on this bill in front of appropriations. It was on consent. That meant that everybody agreed that it should move forward. But late last night, it was pulled off of consent. So now we have to go in and explain why this issue is not about cancel culture. This is about a culture that at the truest form had canceled culture against it. When you talk about boarding schools and the slogans, kill the man, save the Indian, those things are true cancel culture. So we're willing to go in there and debate these issues. When you talk about the first governor in the state of California putting bounties on the souls of Indian people and got paid when they brought those bodies forward, that's a history of cancel culture. This is not about cancel culture. This is about respect and getting that voice of our people heard. So we're going to bat this bill. I'll be presenting it in about a half hour, and we anticipate it moving out of approach to the full assembly floor.
So much of this is about getting the story right. And if any state has that opportunity, you'd think it would be California. Is there a lot of support for this change of story?
There definitely is. There's allies in the state legislature at this time. Certainly the Speaker of the Assembly, Speaker Rendon, is a good ally on these issues, as well as others. So we've been able to create a select committee on Native American affairs, which I hold hearings on topics. And I have 12 members that are on that board, on that committee with me, that are totally in favor of these issues that we're talking about now. So there seems to be, here in the state of California, in the state legislature, the majority of the legislators are totally on board in tackling these issues with me.
We only have about a minute left, but I wanted to ask you, are you optimistic about our ancestors coming home?
I am, but there has to be more work. I mean, certainly the issue of repatriation of Native American remains here in the state of California and across the United States is nothing new. But what we need to do as Indian people throughout the United States and lean on our allies in other parts of the world is to make this a top priority of ours, to make sure that we're getting those remains back to the rightful people for proper reburial. This topic spears up whenever there's an issue around a UC or those things, but this is an issue that plagues our people 365 days a year, if not since the beginning of the state of California and the Spanish incursion. This is an issue that's important to all Indian people. And I would hope that the advocacy will continue to build and the momentum will continue to build so that we could get our ancestors back to the rightful people.
Thank you, Assemblyman Ramos. And we'll be right back. John Tahsuda III is a regular contributor to Indian Country Today. In 2002, he was the staff director for the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. He is also a former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs and served in that position from 2017 to 2020. He recently rejoined his former company, Navigators Global, which is a company that provides political services to several industries, including tribes. John joins us now to talk about policies and its impact on Indian country. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be back.
I want to start by talking about politics. Today, the House of Representatives removed Representative Lynn Cheney from leadership, and there's a little civil war going on within the Republican Party. I'm curious how Native Republicans should navigate this.
Well, I mean, you're right in that I don't know if I call it civil war, but sort of an intra-family fight. And I think Ms. Cheney, represents what looks to be a fairly small group within the Republican caucus who want to dwell on sort of the former president and his, actions late before he left office, the January 6th events, et cetera. So I think that in some sense, I think the larger group would like to move on, and her continuing to discuss those events, is kind of keeping them from doing that. So they can move on to, address the current Congress and the issues they want to pursue. So, I mean, that's obviously one way to look at it. I think that it happens from time to time, and the post that Ms. Cheney was in is supposed to be sort of a caucus voice and a unifying position amongst all of them. And I'm frankly not all that surprised, that there was an effort to remove her and find somebody who would be more of a unifying voice across the whole caucus. So I think that, that's largely what's going on for, Native folks, particularly those tribes that have Republicans that, are part of the caucus there that represent them in their districts. I don't think there's not a large change in policy or the direction that the House Republican leadership wants to go. So I think, again, this is really more of an internal sort of a family dispute about who could better unify the message that's coming out of the Republican caucus.
And it's also a dispute not just among Republicans, but between the House and the Senate, because Senate Republicans are almost on a very different page anyway.
Well, it looks that way, but I have to tell you, having worked in the Senate, there is actually a substantially different way that both the Senate and the House conduct their business within their institution. And so the Senate, the House, I should start with, is much more parliamentarian, which means that the leadership and the members have to be much more unified on what they want to pursue so that they can successfully, get it. It's sort of, it's a majority rule. And in the Senate, historically, you actually have to win over a minority of viewpoints because in general, most actions have to get over a 60 vote, point of order objection to have a chance of moving forward. And so a minority of folks there in the Senate members can both prevent success or help achieve success. And that leads to individual senators being able to more freely express their views on what is important to their state and their constituents, and not so much what the broader caucus within their institution wants to see.
Very interesting. I want to switch gears and ask you the other big news from Indian country and government, and that is the distribution of $20 billion. How is that process unfolding in your view?
So it's interesting. I would say first off, it's not easy. With that amount of money in the short time frame, obviously last year, it was difficult to get that money out in some sort of methodology. So I think the Treasury Department deserves some credit. They cobbled together some consultations, heard from tribal leaders in pretty short order, and came up with a methodology that certainly looks to address some of the shortcomings of the methodology used last year. There are some slight differences in the enacting language in the legislation, which I think helped them to also pursue a different methodology. One of the things, though, that I think is always difficult, and I'm not sure that they resolved it with their methodology, that was how to equitably distribute funding like this, given the great diversity among tribes. And so, they really focus a vast majority of the funding, $12.35 billion, going strictly on tribal membership population-wise. And if you look at the numbers, two tribes account for 800,000 of, and let's be generous, let's say there's 2.5 million enrolled tribal members. The number might be slightly less than that. But that is almost 40%. Let's say, let's be generous and say 35% of the entire tribal population in the United States. Two tribes will get the funding for that, for that huge amount. I think that there are other ways that you could try to account and more equitably distribute the funding, particularly if, as a lot of people anticipate, a large amount of that funding will go to infrastructure. And that means tribes who have, are responsible for large land bases and getting infrastructure in place for their tribal members that live there. When I look at the methodology that they used, I'm not sure they really took that into account. And so that we'll see, that may be a shortcoming that comes forth in the next, over the next year as this funding gets distributed.
Fascinating. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Mark. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. We will be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.